3 rockets exploded. One chance left. Everything he owned was gone. It was August 2008. SpaceX had burned through nearly $100 million in 6 years. The fourth Falcon 1 rocket sat on the launch pad at Kwajalein Atoll, a tiny island in the middle of the Pacific, and if it failed, the company would die that same night. He didn't tell the team how close they were to bankruptcy. He couldn't. They were already exhausted. 3 failures in 2 years, each one more devastating than the last. Engineers were leaving. Investors had gone silent. The media had written SpaceX off as another billionaire's vanity project, another tech fantasy that couldn't survive contact with reality. But Elon Musk had made a decision no one knew about yet. He had split his remaining personal fortune between 2 companies, SpaceX and Tesla. Both were dying. Both needed capital immediately. And both were considered jokes by the industry veterans who had spent decades in aerospace and automotive engineering. If this launch failed, he would lose everything within weeks. Not just the company, not just the money, but the entire vision of making humanity a multi-planetary species. He was betting everything on a machine that had never successfully reached orbit. The night before the 4th launch, he sat alone in a cramped control room on Omelek Island. The air was thick with humidity. Salt from the ocean clung to everything: the walls, the equipment, his skin. Outside, beyond the small window, the Pacific Ocean stretched into infinite blackness. No lights, no civilization, just water and sky. Inside, a dozen screens glowed with telemetry data, fuel pressure readings, engine temperature curves, trajectory simulations running on loop. Everything looked perfect on paper, every calculation checked, every system tested. But paper doesn't survive fire, and tests don't account for chaos. What he didn't tell anyone, this wasn't just about SpaceX anymore. NASA was watching this launch. So was the Department of Defense. So were competitors who wanted him to fail. Legacy aerospace giants like Lockheed Martin and Boeing. Companies with billion-dollar government contracts and decades of monopoly over American spaceflight. If Falcon 1 succeeded, NASA had privately indicated they would consider awarding SpaceX a contract under the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services program. Real money, real missions, a path to survival. If it failed, the door would close forever. The government would never trust a private startup with space missions again. The narrative would be set. Space is too complex, too dangerous, too important to be left to entrepreneurs. Musk had engineered every detail of this 4th rocket himself. Lighter fuel tanks made from aluminum-lithium alloy. New turbopump igniters designed to prevent the combustion instability that destroyed the 3rd rocket. A completely redesigned stage separation mechanism, the failure point that had doomed the 1st launch. But engineering doesn't guarantee success. Physics is unforgiving, and at some point you run out of chances to learn from failure. The first failure happened in March 2006. Falcon 1's maiden flight lasted 25 seconds. A fuel line corroded by salt air burst during ignition. The rocket pitched sideways and crashed into the reef just off the launch pad. Months of work, millions of dollars, gone in less than half a minute. The second failure came in March 2007. This time, the rocket made it through first stage flight, but during stage separation, the spent first stage didn't separate cleanly. It collided with the second stage, tumbling both into the ocean. They had been so close, 70 kilometers up, almost to space. The third failure was the worst. August 2008, just weeks before this 4th attempt. Everything went perfectly for the first 2 minutes. Stage separation worked, second stage ignited. The rocket was accelerating toward orbit when suddenly, engine shut down. An investigation later revealed that residual fuel sloshing in the first-stage tank had created a phenomenon called thrust oscillation, which vibrated the entire structure until a critical component failed. 3 different failure modes, 3 different engineering problems. 3 times the team thought they had solved everything. Musk walked the launch pad the night before the 4th attempt, alone. No cameras, no engineers, just him and the rocket. It stood 68 feet tall, slender and white against the dark sky, umbilical cables still attached, fuel lines pressurized and venting small clouds of condensation. He touched the cold metal of the first stage, put his hand on it, felt the vibration of pumps circulating super-chilled kerosene and liquid oxygen through the lines. This machine represented 6 years of his life, hundreds of millions of dollars, the dreams of everyone who believed commercial spaceflight was possible. And it could explode in 90 seconds. But there was something else he hadn't told the team, something about the money. SpaceX had raised approximately $100 million from investors by mid-2008. That money was gone. Musk had personally invested another $100 million of his own, fortune he'd made from selling PayPal to eBay in 2002. That was nearly gone too. Tesla, his other company, was simultaneously in crisis. The Roadster production was plagued with problems. Costs had spiraled out of control. The 2008 financial crisis had frozen all venture capital funding. Tesla was weeks away from bankruptcy. Musk had made a choice. He divided his remaining personal funds, roughly $40 million, between the 2 companies, just enough to keep both alive for a few more weeks, not enough to save either one if things went wrong. He didn't tell the SpaceX team that the company had maybe 60 days of cash left. He didn't tell Tesla's board that he was diverting funds to keep a rocket company alive. He kept both companies running on fumes and hope, believing that if one succeeded, he could use that momentum to save the other. It was the most reckless financial decision of his life, and he made it in silence. September 28, 2008. The 4th Falcon 1 rocket stood fueled and ready. The launch window opened at 4:15 p.m. local time. The team had run through every checklist 3 times, every valve, every sensor, every abort trigger. Musk stood in the control room surrounded by engineers, all of them staring at their screens. The atmosphere was tense. No one spoke unless they had to. Everyone knew what was at stake. The countdown reached T-minus 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7. The Merlin engine ignited, a controlled explosion of kerosene and liquid oxygen, producing 77,000 pounds of thrust. The rocket shook but held to the pad as computers verified all systems were nominal. 3, 2, 1. Liftoff. The rocket rose, trailing a column of white exhaust and fire. Slow at first, the tyranny of the rocket equation, fighting gravity with every ounce of thrust. Then faster, accelerating. The roar echoed across the empty Pacific, a sound that shook the walls of the control room, even though they were hundreds of meters away. Musk didn't move. His eyes were locked on the telemetry screen. Altitude increasing, velocity nominal, flight profile tracking perfectly. 20 seconds, 30, 40. First stage burn continuing, no anomalies. 60 seconds, past the point where the first rocket failed. 1 minute 30. The rocket broke through max Q, maximum dynamic pressure, the moment when aerodynamic stress is highest. It survived. 2 minutes, stage separation approaching. This was the moment that had killed 2 previous rockets, the moment where everything could fall apart. At 2 minutes and 40 seconds, explosive bolts fired. The first stage separated cleanly. For 3 seconds, both stages coasted on momentum alone, the dead first stage falling away, the second stage preparing to ignite. Then the second stage Kestrel engine fired. The room erupted in muted cheers, people catching themselves, not wanting to celebrate too early. Stage separation had worked. They had passed the barrier that destroyed the first and third rockets. But they weren't in orbit yet. The Kestrel engine burned. 4 minutes, 5, 6. The rocket was now above the Kármán line, the official boundary of space, at 100 kilometers altitude. But space isn't orbit. Orbit requires speed, enough horizontal velocity to counteract Earth's gravity. 7 minutes, 8. The second stage continued firing. Musk still hadn't moved. His expression was unreadable. The telemetry showed everything nominal, but he had learned not to trust perfection. Rockets find ways to fail. 9 minutes into flight, and then engine cutoff. Planned, controlled. The rocket was coasting now, ballistic, unpowered. The flight computer calculated the final trajectory. Falcon 1, Flight 4, has achieved orbit. The voice on the radio was calm, almost casual, but the control room exploded. Engineers leaped from their chairs. People hugged. Some cried. Others just stood there, stunned, not quite believing it had actually worked. Musk allowed himself a single moment, a breath, a slight nod, and then he was already thinking about what came next. The world celebrated. News outlets covered the successful launch. NASA issued a statement congratulating SpaceX. The narrative shifted overnight from another billionaire failure to the future of commercial space. But inside SpaceX, the crisis wasn't over. The company was still nearly bankrupt. That successful launch didn't come with immediate revenue. They had proven the concept, but they still needed customers, still needed contracts, still needed capital to build the next rocket and the one after that. Musk spent the next 3 months in brutal negotiations, with NASA trying to secure the COTS contract, with investors trying to raise emergency bridge funding, with his own board trying to convince them the company could survive long enough to matter. In December 2008, NASA awarded SpaceX a $1.6 billion contract for 12 cargo missions to the International Space Station. It saved the company. But it almost didn't happen, because there was a conversation that took place 3 weeks after that fourth launch, a conversation almost no one knows about. In late October 2008, Musk met with his closest advisors. The topic, whether to shut down SpaceX or Tesla. He couldn't save both. The money wasn't there. The financial crisis had made new investment impossible. He had to choose. Tesla had a clearer path to profitability. Electric cars were a growing market. The technology was proven. The Roadster, despite production problems, was generating buzz. Investors understood cars. SpaceX was still a gamble. One successful launch didn't prove reliability. Rockets blow up. Contracts could be canceled. The technology was brutal and unforgiving. His advisors recommended he focus everything on Tesla. He chose SpaceX. Not because it made financial sense, not because it was the safer choice, but because he genuinely believed, that making humanity multiplanetary was more important than making electric cars. It was an ideological decision disguised as a business strategy. What did that decision cost him? His first marriage had already ended, strained in part by the relentless demands of building 2 companies simultaneously. His personal wealth, once over $200 million, had been reduced to almost nothing. He was living on loans, personal credit, whatever he could scrape together. Friends stopped calling. Investors stopped returning emails. The media wrote profiles questioning his judgment, his sanity, his competence.
And through it all, he kept working. 20-hour days, sleeping in the factory when Tesla was behind schedule, flying to Kwajalein for rocket tests, negotiating with NASA while simultaneously trying to prevent Tesla from collapsing. The fourth Falcon 1 launch wasn't the end of the story. It was barely the beginning. Years later, in 2020, SpaceX would launch astronauts to the International Space Station, the first time a private company had done so. The Crew Dragon capsule sat atop a Falcon 9 rocket, a direct descendant of that first successful Falcon 1. Musk watched the launch from Kennedy Space Center. He looked older, grayer, more exhausted, but when the rocket cleared the tower and the capsule separated successfully in orbit, he allowed himself a rare smile. Someone asked him later what he was thinking in that moment. He said he was thinking about Kwajalein, about the fourth launch, about how close it all came to ending before it began. The question people ask now is whether that fourth launch was luck or genius, whether Musk's gamble was justified or insane. But the real question is different. It's not whether he succeeded, it's what he was willing to sacrifice and what he sacrificed in others to get there. Because every decision has a cost, every risk carries consequences, and the people who change the world aren't always the ones who pay the highest price. Sometimes it's the people around them. And that's a story almost no one talks about.